City Council asked staff to examine what would be involved in replacing the KCATA's Metroflex service with service provided directly by the city. I think it was actually Councilmember Stefan who generated the request. If I remember correctly, this actually happened at the budget work session, not last September, but the September before that in 2016. So it's taken us a while to get this to you. In all honesty, Mike Smith who's been our KCATA liaison, is person I tasked with this. And given everything that was going on, probably took Mike a little bit longer to get something to me that than he would have liked. And I do want to give credit where it's due. A lot of the information that's being presented to you tonight was developed by Mike. But that's what brings us to be presenting this to you tonight. So our fiscal year 2018 budget, we're in the 2018 fiscal year now, includes about $428,000 for KCAT services in general. That includes both the fixed route service that runs through the city and the Metroflex service. And between the two, the Metroflex service is just about 2/3 of the cost of what we pay the KCATA for their transit services within North Kansas City. So if we assume the same percentage in this year, we don't have that yet. I'll be bringing that contract to you probably in December. It's about when we usually bring the KCATA renewal to you. But if we assume the same percentage in this year, then the Metroflex would cost the city about $284,000 in this fiscal year. Based on an estimated annual ridership, which they've indicated to us of about 18,900 for a year, the cost of the city is $15.27 per passenger trip. We charge 25 cents per passenger currently, so that leaves the net cost of the city of about $15.03 per customer trip. The City of Excelsior Springs provides a bus service directly to its residents, and they were suggested to us by Councilmember Stefan as somebody that we might take a look at and to see what might be involved if we were to provide this service directly to our residents. So we did contact Excelsior Springs. We did get quite a bit of information from them. Appreciate their help in providing us information about their service. And we've used them as a reference for what it might take North Kansas City to provide this service directly to our residents. Well, one thing that is important to note is the difference between what Excelsior Springs does and what we currently do is that they provide a circulator service, a fixed route service throughout the city on a fixed schedule, whereas we here in North Kansas City provide point-to-point service, almost like taxi service, whereas somebody arranges a pickup at a particular point and arranges a delivery to another point within North Kansas City. This is all within North Kansas City. We don't go outside of the city limits. But it's a direct service from point to point. So that's a significant difference between what we currently do and what Excelsior Springs does. For this study, we assumed a number of things. First of all, we assumed that service would continue to be offered the number of hours that we offer it now, which is 94 hours a week. We assumed that part-time employees would be used to avoid paying benefits. So we would need 94 person hours, we think, to operate this service. Well, that's per certain things, but we also assume that we could manage to do this by hiring part-time employees, and by doing that, we would not have to pay benefits, which is a significant part of any personnel cost. We assumed an hourly rate of $15 an hour for the drivers and for the dispatcher coordinator that we think we would need to hire, or part-time. We assumed the same 25 cents per fare, and we assumed the same ridership of 18,900 people. Taking a quick look at what Excelsior Springs does, they have a budget of about $161,000 in their last budget year. The great majority of that is, in terms of revenue, comes from federal or state funds, and almost entirely federal funds, of about $104,000. $103,000 of that is federal. We'll talk about that in a moment. in terms of operating expenses, the majority of their expenses for salaries and benefits. They also have expenses for vehicle maintenance, other services for paying for utilities, for gas and oil. Excelsior Springs has two 20-passenger buses. They cost about $51,000 each. And they try to replace those at about 100,000 miles or 5 years, whichever. They do have two handicapped seats on those buses, so that reduces their non-handicapped seats to 14. But that's how their buses. We have a picture in the memo that was provided to you what their buses look like. Excelsior Springs also has an office in a city building and a bus storage facility. Our analysis of what it would take if North Kansas City were to provide this service directly, well, first of all, in terms of revenue that we might expect to receive, based upon the research that we, and when I say we, primarily Mike Smith, did, we do not believe that we would really have a likelihood of getting any federal funds. Again, Excelsior Springs receives about $103,000 out of a $161,000 budget. First, Excelsior Springs receives funds from a 5311 rural grant. We would not qualify that given our location. And secondly, while it is technically possible for an individual city to receive federal funding from the Federal Transportation Administration, it appears unlikely. Our reason that we say that is from discussions that we had with the city of Independence. Independence did look at having their own bus service and instead of the KCATA provided contractor service that they have. And they looked very closely at trying to see what would be involved in receiving federal funds for that. And given all of the different things that you have to go through and the difficulty in getting it, they determined that that was unlikely, and they ultimately decided not to proceed with that. Now, I don't know if the fact that not receiving federal funds was the only reason. There might have been other factors involved with Independence's decision, but from what we understand, it was a significant factor. We would estimate a cost of about $336,000 to operate this bus service directly. Now, in coming up with that estimate, we did extrapolate some of what Excelsior Springs pays for certain things to determine what it might be for our augmented service. So they provide 29 hours of service on their system. So to some degree on a number of these, we did just say, okay, so proportionally, what would 29 hours at whatever they're paying mean that it would cost us to pay at 94 hours. We just sort of figured on a mathematical computation. That isn't necessarily the only way to try to figure out what these costs would be, but it's a way. And given that we were asked to take a look at Excelsior Springs, we thought it was a reasonably fair way to try to determine what our costs might be to provide service, given what their experience has been. So that's how we, in large part, how we came up with the number that we did. There are a number of questions that we think would be involved in moving to a city-provided service as opposed to what we're doing now. One would be if we continue to offer on-demand service or if we move to something of a circulator-style service as Excelsior Springs does. It's probably not something my guess would be that our residents would prefer. Should the current level of service hours per week be maintained at 94 or decreased? It was interesting to me that Excelsior Springs provides so many fewer hours of service than we do currently. Should our passenger fare be maintained at 25 cents? That is very, very low. Get to that a little bit further in a moment. A city-operated service would involve, we think, hiring some form of coordinator. We do think 2 buses would be necessary to maintain 94 hours. And we would need to determine where the buses would be stored and maintained. We haven't attempted to do that for purposes of this presentation to you tonight. So, looking at what we believe it would cost us to provide the service directly compared to what we're paying now. This analysis seems to indicate that compared to a current city cost of about $284,000, the city operated cost of $335,000, it would be significantly more, we believe, to provide the service directly than to continue contracting with KCATA. As I noted, we have not attempted to estimate initial setup costs of a bus facility or to have an office for somebody to coordinate trips. There are probably unknowns that we haven't thought about. We've done our best to try to consider things, but to the extent that there are unknowns, they probably would tend to make the cost higher for directly paid service. Given all of these things, we would not recommend moving away from our contracted service with the KCATA to a directly provided service. But this has pointed out a couple of things that we may want to look at further, at least periodically. One, the number of hours and days and times that we're providing this service. One thing that I asked for, but we were not able to receive from KCATA in time for tonight's presentation, was some kind of a indication of just when the heaviest times of usage are of the service that we offer now. I would really, if they're able to provide that, like to try to get that. I was hoping they could provide that, but when they did, the hours, what they gave me just did not break things down between days and times. I'd like to continue to get that just for our own information. And then the fare that we charge. I'm sure that for those who ride the bus, 25 cents a fare is wonderful. But it at least needs to be noted by everybody that in doing that, the city is subsidizing about $15. So each ride, according to the current cost and number of rides, costs us about $15, and those who ride the bus are only paying 25 cents. I think that's a little out of whack. I'm sure that as members of a political body, it would be a tough thing to increase, but I think that's something we ought to at least recognize, is that those who ride the bus are being very, very heavily subsidized by those throughout the city. Over 98% of their fare is subsidized. So those are our findings based on the analysis we did, and I'd be happy to try to take any questions that you have.
Zach, go ahead.
Okay, a couple of things. First of all, when you're doing the contract with the KCATA, would you be able to, because I believe the last year's contract had a clause in it to where no service or routes can be changed or whatever without the city signing off on it? Do you remember that, Eric?
Yes, I do.
Okay, can you make sure that that's included?
I'm sure it will be, but yes, sir, we'll make sure that's included. That, of course, that regards fixed routes, not the Metroplex.
Yeah,
but
the
yes,
fixed
sir.
routes, yes,
But
yes,
sure,
sir.
yeah, we'll make sure that stays in.
I think it's a great service that we offer. I mean, before we did any reduction of hours or what have you, I would like to have that demographic information from the KCATA. And as far as the fare, I mean, I'm not for sticking it to people, but I think it's been 25 cents for quite a long time. And I think we should at least look at raising it either to 50 cents. Maybe somebody said $1, but I mean, at least 50 cents. It wouldn't make that much of a difference, but it'd make a little bit of a difference. And as you noted, they're riding for pretty cheap. So that's just my opinion, though. So
You know,
I'm sure other
it
people
wouldn't
have.
raise a great deal of revenue, but I think there is something to be said for users paying something more than 2% of the entire cost of what it costs
Yes,
to transport them. So I think it would be worthwhile to at least make a token increase.
As you know, probably the people at the gardens use that quite extensively. And we're concerned about the entire situation. I've talked to some people who use it a lot, and they're not adverse to raising the rates if that's what it takes to get what they want done. But I was wondering, I was just thinking, number one, we need hours that would accommodate these people that go to the hospital. We can't have the time cut off at 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon because they're in the doctor's office or in the hospital. So it would have to be something where they could actually meet their appointments from 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning until 4 or 5, 6 o'clock at night. That's very important to our people. The second thing was, I was wondering, is there any way, and this is just a thought, that it could be a two-tiered type of pay? In other words, people who are 65 or 55 or 70 or whatever over would get a reduction in the rate, and those that were younger or physically or mentally unable to drive a car, you know, would pay that too, and then the other people would pay the higher rate. I don't know how complex of an issue that would be to keep track of that, but it would be, you know, seniors get privileges. So if we could get a second tier for that, that might be something we could think of also.
That's something we could take a look at. I haven't given that thought, but yeah, it would probably require a driver obtaining some proof of age, but it might be something that would be possible.
Might be something that we could
Yeah,
do.
we could look at that.
I'd like to see it kept below $1, if at all possible. I noticed in your paperwork you had $1. It was some type of a break-even figure. Or
And well, you know, the idea would, in all honesty, would not be because we need the revenue. It would be more that there is, in my view, a certain need for users to pay a reasonable share of the cost of the service.
That's true, and that's a kind of a subjective type thing,
It
is what a
is.
reasonable.
It is.
And other things are subsidized in the city here for people. I mean, we have 2 trash pickups. You know, that's a tremendous and wonderful thing for people, and most of the residents have really enjoyed that. But that is a subsidy. So cities that are attracting people and things, you got to take a loss. You know, it's a loss leader, as we used to say in the business world, to attract people to maintain their lifestyle and so on and so forth. Our people at the Gardens are very much in need of that bus service, because they do realize that they're going to have to maybe pay something a little bit more. But let's try to figure out if we could possibly subsidize it somewhere or other so they could be under the $1. And then look for the 2-tier.
You know, as your city administrator, I've also been the bad guy who's touched the third rail ever so lightly with regard to trash service and suggested that we might take a look at less frequent service, and the council has let me know what they thought about that.
Yeah.
So
Well, wait till they get in a walker or a wheelchair or have to have their prescription drugs or have to go to the doctor and have no me.
Yeah.
These people that we have need their independence just as much as they possibly can. Some don't have family. Some of them are bad shape physically, and they depend on that bus service.
understood.
All right, thank you.
A couple things. One, I've talked to several people in Ward 3, most of them on my block that use it, and they see no problem at all going to $1. I doubt there's anybody that lives in senior housing couldn't afford $1 on that thing. And as far as the age thing, I understand the spirit of that. However, I also know there's a lot of young people on disability that get far less money a month than people that live at the senior housing. My nephew doesn't live here, but he's totally disabled, and his parents are dead. He lives on his own, $700 and whatever the minimum, $750 a month, and he lives on that. So you can't go by age, is what I'm trying to say. Is he's a lot younger than the seniors. You know,
Right.
I'm a senior too. I mean, sure, if
That's
this
right,
sounds
Rich.
fine, but I don't think it can only be based on age.
I think it was misunderstood. I think I made the comment that if the people were physically or mentally unable to drive a car, had a problem, if you have somebody on your block that's obviously on Social Security disability or in a wheelchair or has a problem, those people would ride at the reduced rate also.
That would be harder to determine.
Well, I would point out,
than age.
KCATA already has that built into their normal bus network now. They do have discount fares for disabilities, discount fares for seniors, and discount fares for youth. So it's something that they already have built into their program citywide. So it might not be that something that
But
kind of model over to this.
even if even if I was using it, and I may have to use it someday, I wouldn't mind paying $1 to ride on. I know the taxis. Last time I looked at a taxi, it said $3.60 is what the meter starts at. And then it's like $2 and something a mile or something like that.
Would that be $1 each way?
Well, this is all this would, I was being hypothetical, but yes, I guess so, sir. I mean, that, right now, when somebody goes one way, they pay a quarter, and then when they go the
Right.
other way, they pay a quarter.
Maybe it could be $1
Round trip.
round trip.
That would be 50 cents round, 50
Right,
cents
yeah,
per trip.
yeah.
At least that would be doubling the rate, the current rate.
This might be a whole nother project, but do we consider having a private business do it instead of having our own or having the KCATA do it?
That is not something we analyzed. That's, we could
I mean,
issue an
if-
RFP and see what that might result in.
I was just curious if that was even
But
something
that is
would
not,
be.
yes, sir, that is something that could be explored, but it isn't something that we explored in this
All right.
analysis.
And then in terms of hours, I think the number of hours could potentially be decreased, but you need more data on that. I mean, you need what you're referring to
Right.
just to get that,
Correct.
just to really know.
I agree with that.
And then that's really all I have.
The one thing, with regard to private service, again, we could do some kind of RFP, and the private sector often does better than the public sector. What seems to have a great effect on cost is the availability of federal grants, which we do not believe we'd have here. Yeah.
Fred?
Well, I want to thank you for doing the analysis on this study. It looks like it would cost more. Although I do note that that's a 20-passenger bus. I don't think we currently have 20-passenger buses. I think they're smaller, but I don't know how much difference that would make cost-wise.
Might make some difference in the capital cost of buses, which have been factored into the operating cost here. So I take your point, and it makes some difference perhaps on fuel costs.
But it didn't hurt. It doesn't hurt to look into matters like this. And at this point, it appears that it would be more costly, more expensive to go forward with this than what we currently have. Although I think we're paying a lot to KCAT for their service. And I'm really not big on upping any fares. We just did that here, just seems like a couple of years ago. It used to be 10 cents for a long time. Now it's 25 cents. Now we're talking several dollars. And like you say,
I used to go to the movies for a dime when I was a kid.
and like you say, your nephew, someone in that position, he can't, that would be a hardship on him, I think. Even though it seems like, yeah, a lot of people are going to say, well, that's nothing for me. But for the people that are on fixed incomes, it's a little bite.
That's right.
And as far as to addressing your position on maybe having private industry do this, I think that was tried once, wasn't it? Looked into. And there's a lot of hoops that need to be jumped through on that. So I don't know how that would work out. But
Well, do we know for sure
I just want to say that thanks for doing this.
Yes, sir.
that the ATA would allow us, like us, the city, to do it? Or an independent?
Yeah, I know you mentioned this, sir, but I don't think there would be anything legally which would prohibit us. We're not aware of anything legally which would prohibit us from offering the service directly if we chose to.
I think perhaps another downside to doing it ourselves, which I don't want to get into really, is liability. We didn't mention liability insurance.
We did try to factor insurance costs in, but you're right, there's liability insurance that would be involved.
I think it'd just be a nightmare trying to do it ourselves. I certainly don't want to do away with it. There's too many people the people that need it really need it bad, they can't drive. My next door neighbor's legally blind. And, there's people like that. I mean, we want to have it, but, I'm just passing on what the writers in my area said. They wouldn't mind paying up to $1, but they don't go every day either.
Well, the thing about it is, You go $1 one way and $1 coming back. I mean, there you know, when you go from.
Well, yeah, I didn't realize we charged both ways.
Maybe we could do
Yep.
50 cents.
You know,
I would say no more than 50 cents because we're up to $1.
just telling you about money, I mentioned any names, but when I passed this around to some of the people in our building, this one lady said, I really appreciate that bus, I need it. She says, I'm willing to go pay a little bit more. She says, I wonder if they would go with 35 cents. That just shows you some people that live off of $800 a month, that's a lot of money.
Absolutely.
Would you like me to bring you something for formal action as far as consideration of increasing the fare? Would force you to take a vote.
When is our current contract in, on with what we've got right now? Does it go through 2018?
Yeah, it goes by the calendar year. So it ends at the end of this calendar year, and then you
Maybe we
should be
could
getting that
see
soon.
something before the end of the calendar year then.
So I could, right, now, the KCATA doesn't really care what we charge, whatever we
Right.
decide to charge is our own, but if you like, you could consider that at the time that we bring that contract before you and whether you would like to make any changes in the current fare.
I think that's good. Yeah, I just want to reiterate I do think the multi-tier, I would like to see that stay at a quarter, especially for, like I said, the seniors, disabled, and some of the youth, and other people can subsidize it, you know. Some people wouldn't have it, like you said, have a problem paying $1, but at the same time, you could also keep it at a quarter for
We'll explore that with KCATA prior to the contract coming back before you for renewal. As you mentioned, Councilmember, something that they do already, so I don't think it would be something that would be terribly difficult for them to implement.
their
For
standard
us,
fare
if
right
we
now,
wish to do it.
I believe is $1.50 if you take the bus anywhere else in town.
Right.
So that's, oh yeah.
Okay, you got directions?
I think I do, yes, sir.
Anybody else?
Motion adjourned.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.